Hi, it's Clive and Kerry Daley from the Daily Hub, and we are delighted to have Peter Charles from Peter Charles Limited with us today. Just to start, Peter, tell us about your business. What exactly is it that you do?
Okay, so I started Peter Charles Limited about 25 years ago. I think that the best way of working, if you can, is to find something you love doing and then build a job around it. And so I often say about me working in Peter Charles Limited, it beats working. So I enjoy it, not quite every day, that's silly, but most days. And we set out all that time ago to work in difficult business situations. And a difficult business situation in this context is anything where the person who we are working with has a feeling that there's a problem. They have a feeling that there's a problem, and they know that the buck stops on their desk. They've probably already tried all sorts of other solutions, and they arrive with us. Okay, so what does that mean in reality? Well, what we think about is money in, money out, and did we use it wisely on the way through? So although we're finance focused in every case, and we always have something to do with the finance function or the finances of the business, what we're focusing on is the journey of that money, all the way to how did we get it? How do we earn our living around here is a question I often ask people. And then what are we then going to do with the money? And then, of course, how much are we keeping and what do we need it for? So it's a wide understanding of what goes on in finance. In terms of the clients that we have, they range in size, and that creates quite a difficult communications problem. So our biggest client is a FTSE 250, FTSE 100. Our biggest client is a FTSE 100. They've been hit by COVID, and they want to, as have all businesses, and they want to get a better understanding of how to manage the business. They were a high growth business, and so they were measuring the growth. Now they need to manage the business. But I'm seeing exactly the same thing in a motorhomes business, which we're involved in, which needs some work done in the finance function. They were getting their financing; it was working very, very nicely. Now they've gone a little bit flat. The financiers want every single little detail about how they're managing the business that they didn't need on the growth. So we're seeing exactly the same thing in that FTSE 100 as we're seeing in a 10 million turnover, relatively small business. So we do that sort of thing. But obviously, the smaller the business, that we do different types of things. One of the things that we really, really focus on is cash flow. Great way of understanding a business. Where did the money come from? And then where does it go? And how are we using it on that chain? And what can we do with it? So it's always money in. What are we doing with the money? Money out. In terms of sectors, that finance, that kind of way of thinking that says what goes on around here in a business is universal. So we deal with business problems, normally in the finance function. And then finally, I've got a range of awesome people I've been working with the last 10, 15, 20 years, who are then capable of taking whatever problem that the client presents with. We then start to work on what the solution might look like, and then we pull through with an implementation. Because actually, it's not a solution until the problem's gone. Yeah. So, and if I was going to be a little bit anti, I would say we don't arrive with solutions. Because actually, if we do something that is unique compared to the businesses that I find, and comparisons when I'm talking to people, we spend far longer trying to understand what the problem is. Because quite often, when you've got a really good problem, and you've heard this before, Clive, yeah, you're thinking, I remember this speech. If you can get a really, really good problem, actually the solution's easy. Or the idea of the solution is easy, and then the implementation takes its own toolbox. And so we work from really a kind of inchoate feeling, there's a problem here, but the buck stops on my desk. I have to do something. The usual solutions aren't working. Come up with some ideas and then implement them until that business gets back into action. So that's what we do.
You raise a really interesting point. You're right. So when I was a CEO, you were a valuable asset to come in. But I remember it being like 20 questions if only it was only 20 questions. But actually it was that filtering down to understand what the real issue was, and then have a personalized solution to then move it forward. Interestingly, so, we look at your website and on LinkedIn, and it feels very finance, but what you've described is obviously businesses have to make money and manage their cash, but it's almost a consultative and leadership discussion that you're having with businesses.
Indeed, and I think this is in this kind of communication difficulty. We're a finance business, we're not a marketing business. So guess what? But also finance is always where we start. So if I just think of a business where I'm working with them right now, the exam question was, can you help us specify a finance director? We've just been through 3 or 4 of them, and it's just not quite working. So I said, look, it takes a little bit of time to hire a finance director and make sure that we get exactly the right person. Probably around 3 months. Do you mind if we just quickly do a cash flow forecast, just to make sure that we're going to be in good shape in 3 months' time when the new person arrives? Now, as it happens, I had a feeling that was a necessary thing to do from other materials that they'd given me. So we produced that cash flow forecast, and the key thing that we did that got that particular on side is we put it in a graph. The chief executive, who has a PR and marketing background, went, we can't make payroll in August. So the decision making was really, really clear. I said, well, look, we'll continue to specify what you need in order to get your finance director, but we will at the same time just help you manage that through that period. If we just take that business now, I can tell you now, because we're still working with them in various ways. They know for certain that they can make payroll for the next 6 months. And actually the back end of the cash flow graph, which I've got in my head, and so I'm sort of somehow illustrating it to you here, it shows an uptick, as we would expect, coming into the last quarter of the year. So what's changed for those people, brilliant entrepreneurs, lovely, lovely people, what's changed for them is that they're no longer doing reconciliations over a glass of wine on a Friday evening. Yeah. And they're able to think about strategy. They're able to think about branding. The business is about 40% bigger than it was then. And that growth has been controlled in a way which has been very good for the people themselves and their lives, as well as the business. So we've got the growth and the life, if that makes any sense. I mean, it doesn't mean they don't work hard. Of course they do. All founder entrepreneurs do. One of the things that we think about in that when we're trying to understand the problem, and I know you didn't ask me this question, but I know you would have, Clive, is what on earth is going on here? And in this particular business, they can now see 2 years on that 2 years ago, they were going through a transition point. And I define a transition point as everything that you used to do that brought success, you're doing it better than you ever have, and it's still not working. So what that is your business has gone through a size barrier where actually you know how to run your business if you roll back to the size before. You don't want to roll back to the size before, so what are you going to do? And with some businesses, the right thing to do, with one of the businesses we're working with, we're going to roll back to the size before and then have another growth path from there. With this particular business, we just powered on through and kind of did the change as we were going along.
Great work that you're doing with businesses. Obviously, we're still in a very challenging time. How has it been over the last few months for your business and for the clients that you're helping?
I think that several different businesses in several areas. So one of them has been hit hard. Its product is an analog product in that people bring their bodies to go and do whatever they're going to do. And like many businesses like that, they pay in advance for various things. But they get paid in advance. So now they've kind of gone into stasis. They're holding somebody else's cash. that somebody is entitled to the cash back. I can tell you a very specific story about that, which is quite interesting if you want to hear it. And so there's a dilemma there as to what's right and what's wrong in that environment. So, okay, bigger businesses have got better cash resources and better financing, and they can carry themselves through. And that's one of the areas where we're just sort of working on, the granularity of how things work and how to manage in more difficult times. Actually, is at a granular, not quite transaction by transaction level, but almost event by event level. You've really got to say, what are the big things that happen in my business? What are the big transactions? What's going on? And how do I manage those, particularly when we're thinking about cash? More generally, though, because your question is more general, there's a manufacturing business that I'm working with, and they were on it because as soon as it came out, they said to themselves, we do not want an infected person to come into our manufacturing facility. So we were all banned from the office well before lockdown. So we kind of got a little bit of a view on it. That actually helped because it made me change my view. So we went into cash protection before anybody else. We went into profit protection before anybody else. We did the 4-day week. We held back on cash. We stuck a bunch of people on furlough. I mean, we just went at it as if this is the next year. We just did not stop. Actually, our sales team were awesome, and they just put their heads down and they worked. Selling is mostly hard work. And they just went, oh, okay, we're going to just work really, really hard. Teamwork, selling disciplines, and hard work. And actually, they've sold really, really so well that we were out of the 4-day week within about 3 weeks, just because there was too much work to do, because the business was performing so much better than we imagined. But it was helped by we stayed in cash protection and made sure that we were really, really cautious. The back end of this year, maybe we haven't spent enough money on marketing, but we're still here. And that means that all bets are then on. So that's one business. And that was surprising. They're kind of in the small luxuries, the low price luxuries. And that's probably where people are spending their money. So, but we didn't know that. For my business, there were two effects. One was, one client just went, we're no longer spending CapEx, close all the CapEx projects, you're out. So I lost 20% of our margin target there and then. Happily, another business needed more, so that started to fill the gap. And the other one was, strangely, the world shrank. So one of my best team members, we hired them straight from university. On a kind of an internship type scheme, and then we brought them in, and she was the best one. And then we hired her onto the staff, and we'd had her on staff for about 5 years. And the client that she was looking after was in New York, and they suddenly realised that they could hire somebody who doesn't live in London in the UK to work in New York, and distance just vanished. So now distance had vanished, because I had only ever met her on a screen. Prior to lockdown, they would have said, no, we need to replace her with somebody who you could hire in New York. Suddenly, when everybody went into lockdown, they went, this doesn't matter. And I lost one of my best team members. And guess what? 20% of our margin target went with her. So that was an unexpected, but still partially COVID-related impact. Now, that's interesting for the future, isn't it? Because it means that we're not quite sure where our next bit of competition is coming from. Yeah. So we try and keep fit. I've been the worst at it. Jill's been the best at it. Maybe I would say I've been the worst at it. My wife has been the best at it. So maybe we shouldn't name her. Let me start that again. I've been the worst at it. My wife has been the best at it. But her Zumba teacher returned to South America and is still teaching from there. Well, that means that his trading day now starts in the mornings in the UK and finishes in the evenings in American time. So suddenly competition has suddenly moved. The world has shrunk in ways that we don't understand what that's going to mean for us. And that was illustrated in my tiny little business. Other businesses, we just put one of the businesses straight in a deep freeze, kept one person only. And actually, that business then built up quite a lot of buying tension because it was closed. And as soon as it opened, the buyers came in. So actually, we saved 3 months of cost because of, well, not 3 months of cost, but nearly 3 months of cost in the furlough scheme. We haven't brought everybody back from furlough, and we've got customers banging on the door trying to buy things. So that business went from, probably we would have had to make some fairly brutal cuts in the spring, just at the time as you're coming up to the summer, because we needed to manage cash. But because of the way the furlough scheme worked, and we have to, the government hasn't done everything right, but it has done some stuff which is very, very right, to be honest. If you look around the world, I think it's really got out early with some of this stuff. So we put the business in the deep freeze. We were able to come out of freeze in May and June with the last 3 months sales, pent up demand coming in May, June and July. And we were able to turn a profit for the first half. So it's not all
and I guess that pent up demand is interesting because there's a number of our clients have got that pent up demand, but now it's a case of going, well, okay, once you've gone through that, what's the new run rate? And
yes.
That's the element that says, well, and right now, quite a few of them go, don't know. And we'll just work hard and just see, and then we're just going to have to be agile and then change as we move forward.
Exactly, and so that creates some desire for that money in, what are we doing with it, money out question. What are the performance indicators that create the money in, and what's actually happening, what's really going on? And that comes back to the how do we earn our living round here question. Because if we can ask them the how do we earn our living round here question, they can then stretch the understanding of what's creating the pent up demand. So in the business that I'm thinking about, the pent-up demand is generated by the fact that people can use the products outdoors. And therefore, they're feeling more safe using the products outdoors. But then you say, the thing that we don't know is the selling season going to carry on into the winter? Yeah. And, the kind of customers that might well have been flying somewhere warm for the winter might still be here. Is that going to change our demand? And that makes us very cautious, and you have to try and measure. But we were not set up to measure, and that creates change in the business.
And actually, there's one thing that we've captured from this conversation, which is that you losing one of your team to an American company because it can be remote.
Yes.
And then you go, actually, we've got an unemployment issue that's building every day. You see retailers just making cuts every day. You go, actually, employment isn't just what the jobs are in this country, is what job can you do across the globe? Because you can potentially do it. It depends on your skill set, obviously, but it depends what type of roles that you can do. And there's opportunity there, surely.
There is opportunity there. There's opportunity there, for the person in my team. She got a very nice salary increase for doing that. And I'm, in some ways, absolutely delighted. I've got other young people in the business that we're bringing through. And actually, if we can be recognised as a place where you can get really, really great understanding of how to deliver great stuff to clients, then that makes it much easier to then continue to hire and great people wanting to come through. The other thing that she had, though, which many people, and I am coming to your point about retail, the other thing that she had was she knew from day one how to operate when there was no physical location, because we have always been a remote business. Yeah. And what that means is that we've got some management structures and ways of working, which we don't have people working from home. We have people working. Yeah. And we understand how do we structure the work so that we're only ever measuring the outcome. Yeah. Now let's just imagine one person is twice as good as another. Why should they both sit in the office for the same amount of time? Surely the one who's twice as fast should get to go home early, but that's not fair when they're sitting next to each other. The reward for the one who's twice as fast is that they should get promoted. But what if they're just brilliant at that thing? What if they're just brilliant at doing that? How do they can't get promoted. Promoted normally means you've got to take on new responsibilities. So you can spoil some great people by promoting them in order to pay them more. Yeah. Well, actually, our way of working, I never ask anybody where they are or when they're there. I just ask them, did you do what you said you were going to do by when you said you were going to do it? And that creates but some businesses, that's really, really tough transition if you're used to watching people. Now, so one of the reasons she was able to take advantage of the New York opportunity is from day one, she knew how to work remotely. In fact, I don't interview any of the guys that we bring in. Somebody else does all the interviewing. We interview by telephone, and then we give more and more work to the ones who do great work. And that way, but okay, that's probably a bit of a stretch for lots of people. But nevertheless, output management is much more difficult than input management. It takes a lot more thought, and there's a lot of businesses who've got to think through that. Unfortunately, for those people who are coming out of hospitality, coming out of retail, where they're bringing themselves into the role, they don't necessarily get the kinds of skills of being able to do what we're doing now. Somehow keep an eye on how you're looking in the screen and talking to you and thinking about what we're doing all at the same time. Whereas for all of my team, they all do that naturally because they've been doing it since the beginning of their careers with us. So there's a kind of a strange kind of retraining. So it's easier for people who've now pushed to work at home to compete for work in New York. But they're okay in this environment if they're already in that kind of job. So I think there's a challenge for what are the starter roles in the economy when those starter roles aren't behind bars, they're not standing in shops, and what skills do people need for those starter roles is going to be a different kind of challenge, which I don't yet see who's thinking about how we deal with that challenge.
Yeah, and we work with schools and colleges, and actually I think the biggest question that's been there for the last year or so is, have they got it right what they're teaching right now? Never mind for the future. Mm-hmm. Now you remind me today. We worked together for a number of months, and I did enjoy it. You were absolutely excellent. And I now know where I get a saying. I've adopted one of your sayings. And Kerry will know this. I say, well, the exam question is.
Yes.
And I didn't know where I got it from. It's your fault, but I use it. So my final, the exam question is,
yes,
is that if all of this were to happen again, is there anything that you would do differently for your own business if we were back to March 23rd or early March?
So one of the things that I have done, which I would have done sooner, is I'm working on, let me use highfalutin words, the digital transformation of the business of trying to introduce ourselves to people that we haven't met before so that they can choose to buy. So I had been that person who just went around the country shaking hands with people, literally pressing the flesh, going to networking meetings or meeting people online in one way or another, but first meeting would be coffee or whatever it might be. And in fact, much to my shame, when somebody said to me, look, I'd like to do an online interview with you, I said, I don't come across well on screen. Let me come and see you. Didn't go and see them and didn't get the piece of work. Yeah, and so it's and actually I can remember asking a very similar question about the internet. What do you need the internet for? Right? So I really, I really missed it. Just thinking about the schools for a moment. Actually, some children are now being taught electronically, and they will learn those new skills for that new future that you've just talked about. Naturally, there's going to be a gap in the middle where people got caught out. So. In a perfect world, I would have gone much more digital much sooner. We did do a campaign, which you saw some of, which said, actually, we've got a bit of capacity at the moment because we've lost those projects. The world is in pain. We're volunteering to work with people who might need some help with that, and we try to time it to think about climbing out of lockdown rather than going in, because in a sense going into lockdown is relatively easy compared to climbing out, as you're seeing with the people that you're talking to. So I probably would have moved a bit faster and a bit firmer on that. That would be one thing. I think that the world is not going to go back, and neither am I. So I think it's very unlikely that first meeting with somebody is going to be over coffee. That you might have a couple of meetings and then you're going to meet face to face. And I think the work rate that I need to put into understanding the new world of business development, I am still not there. So what would I do differently is I would keep up. It's always a challenge for a small business, and you know this, keeping up that business of letting customers know that there is an opportunity for them to benefit by hiring, and finding a way of communicating that in a way that says, actually, the right, and I'm quite careful about those words, because somebody who isn't choosing to buy isn't going to then run along and do the things that need to be done anyway. So there's a kind of a loss of time on all sides. But that tension between doing the work and doing the delivery and doing that is tough. And so I can't really talk about what I would have done differently in lockdown, except that the actual disease itself, I was reasonably casual along with a load of other people at the beginning. And I think the balance of risks are more, it's less that the balance of risks are you can end up with some long-term effects from this disease if you're not careful. So I'm probably more cautious and understanding and careful, but I don't know how that's different for anyone else. If I've got a real change I would have made, I would have dived into digital transformation much sooner. If I'd known it was going to go on for that long, I might not have waited 2 months before I really started to say, I need to do my marketing a different way. So actually, I have answered your question now, haven't I? I've finally got there.
You certainly have. Peter, it has been delightful speaking to you. And something that we embrace is it's much better to tell a story of how you help people than to do the sales pitch. I think the sales pitch has gone the way of the dodo. And you eloquently talk about who you've helped and how you've helped them. It's been fascinating listening to it. Peter, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I have to say I've had a blast, so thank you very much. It's been fun.
Fabulous.
Thanks.